At my brother's wedding, he mocked me in his speech. My brother is a single father, a complete failure. The room laughed. My dad added, he's damaged goods. Then the bride stood up and grabbed the mic. The room froze. My name is Mark. I'm 34. And at my own brother's wedding, he called me a complete failure in front of everyone. Before I tell you how his bride turned the tables and silenced the entire room, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The laughter felt like a physical thing, a wave of heat and sound that slammed into me from across the reception hall. It wasn't just a polite chuckle. It was a roar, a full-throated, unrestrained tidal wave of ridicule. And I was the rock it was crashing against. I sat there at table 9, the forgotten island in a sea of celebration. My cheap suit suddenly felt 2 sizes too tight. The knot of my tie felt like a noose. From my vantage point, tucked away by the perpetually swinging doors of the kitchen and the drafty corridor to the restrooms, I had a clear view of the head table. It was a vision of success, bathed in the buttery glow of expensive chandeliers. My family, my younger brother, Vincent, stood on the stage, the microphone in his hand, a conquering hero in a $1,000 tuxedo. He was 5 years my junior, the golden child, the one who had checked every box in the playbook of life that my father had written. And then there was me, the cautionary tale, the example of the road not taken. And of course, Vincent's voice, slick with feigned sincerity, boomed from the speakers. I have to give a special shout-out to my big brother Mark. He made a vague, dismissive gesture in my general direction. 100 heads turned, 100 pairs of eyes searching the shadows for me. The heat on my face intensified. He's always been such a strong example of what not to do. The first wave of laughter hit. It was hesitant, uncertain, the kind of sound people make when they're not sure if they're supposed to find something funny. Vincent's grin widened. He had them. He was just warming them up. No, I'm serious, folks, he said, his voice rising with theatrical energy. The man raised a child on his own. Can you imagine? No wife, no partner. A complete failure in the relationship department. But hey, he's here. Let's hear it for him. The laughter was bolder now. I looked down at my son, Ethan, sitting beside me. He was only 8 and his world was still one of simple truths. Good guys and bad guys, right and wrong. His small face, usually a beacon of pure joy, was crumpled in a mask of deep confusion. He tugged on the sleeve of my jacket. Daddy? He whispered, his voice so small it was almost lost in the noise. Why are they laughing? My throat closed up. I had no answer for him, before I could even try to find one. Another voice, deeper and laced with smug satisfaction, cut through the air. It was my father, Richard. He was on his feet at the head table, raising his glass of champagne in a toast. His smile was wide and proud, aimed directly at me like a weapon. He's damaged goods, my father bellowed, his voice thick with alcohol. But he still polishes up well, doesn't he? That was the line. That was the permission the crowd needed. The room erupted. It was an explosion of cruel, unrestrained glee. I felt every ounce of air get sucked from my lungs. I was hollowed out, a shell of a man with his son's wounded eyes looking to him for an explanation he couldn't give. My only instinct, primal and overwhelming, was to grab Ethan and run, to shield him from this poison, to disappear before the stain of their mockery could touch him. I was about to move to push my chair back and flee, but then, another chair scraped against the polished floor of the head table. A figure in white rose from her seat. It wasn't my mother, wringing her hands ineffectually. It wasn't a sympathetic cousin looking away in shame. It was the bride, Elise, in her magnificent white gown. She stood up with a stillness that was more powerful than any shout. She walked with a calm, deliberate grace, not towards the dance floor, but straight towards a now faltering Vincent. He stared at her, his smug monologue dying on his lips. Honey? What's wrong? She didn't answer. She didn't even look at him. Her eyes were locked on the microphone. Without a word, she reached out and took it from his slack-jawed grasp. And the entire room, as if a switch had been flipped, fell completely, utterly silent. To understand the crushing weight of that silence, you have to understand the years of noise that preceded it. My life wasn't a grand tragedy. It was a quiet, relentless war of attrition fought on two fronts: survival and fatherhood. The war began the day I came home from work to find a note on the kitchen counter and an apartment that was suddenly twice as big and 10 times as empty. Ethan was 5 months old. His mother had written, "I'm sorry, I can't do this." And just like that, she was gone. My world, once filled with vague dreams and possibilities, narrowed to a single, sharp point of focus: him, my son. My life became a meticulously arranged, perpetually fragile construction of schedules. The alarm clock was my enemy, screaming at me at 4:30 every morning. In the pre-dawn darkness, I'd shower, dress, and pack Ethan's lunch for the daycare I could barely afford. Then, a quiet drive through empty streets to my first job at the hardware store. From 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., I was the guy who could find you the right kind of screw, mix the exact shade of Navajo white you wanted, and haul 50-pound bags of concrete without complaining. The smell of sawdust and mineral spirits clung to my clothes like a second skin. It was the smell of paying the rent. Then came the mad dash across town to pick up Ethan. Those few hours in the afternoon were my sanctuary. We were a team. We'd tackle his kindergarten homework at the kitchen table, his little legs swinging beneath his chair. We'd build sprawling Lego cities that defied the laws of physics. I lived for the sound of his giggling, the warmth of his small hand in mine as we walked to the park. He was the reason for the grind. He was the cure for the exhaustion. But the golden hours always ended. Around 6:30 p.m., a high school girl from our building, paid in cash I'd counted out carefully, would come over to babysit, and I'd head out to my second front, the night shift. From 7 p.m. to midnight, I was a security guard at a sterile downtown office building. I'd walk miles of silent, carpeted hallways, the only sounds the hum of the HVAC system and the jingle of keys on my belt. The silence of that building was a different kind of loud. It was filled with the noise of my own thoughts, the car insurance payment that was due, the weird cough Ethan had developed, the gnawing fear of not being enough, of failing him. In the metrics my father and brother used, I was an undeniable failure. No career, no savings, no wife. But in the quiet of our small apartment, I knew I wasn't. I was the monster checker before bed. I was the maker of Saturday morning pancakes, often slightly burnt but always served with a flourish. In Ethan's world, I was the one who could fix anything, the one who was always there. I was his dad. That was my identity. That was my success. The wedding invitation felt like a judgment. It was thick, creamy, and embossed with gold foil, a stark contrast to the bills and junk mail it was wedged between. It screamed of a world I didn't belong to, a world of effortless success and celebration. My first gut reaction was to toss it in the recycling bin. Why would I willingly walk into the heart of my own personal kangaroo court? I took it to work the next day. Dave, my supervisor at the store, was my sounding board. He was a big, gruff man in his late 50s with a heart of gold and a no-nonsense approach to life. He'd seen it all and wasn't impressed by much. He took the invitation, squinted at it over the top of his reading glasses, and let out a low whistle. "Well, look at that. Little Vinny's finally getting hitched," he said, setting it down on the paint-splattered counter. He looked up at me, his expression unreadable. "You gonna go?" "I don't know, Dave," I said, rearranging a display of hammers for the 10th time. "He's my brother." "Is he?" Dave asked, his voice pointed. "A brother doesn't treat you like a second-class citizen. A brother doesn't let his old man walk all over you at every family get-together. Mark, going to this thing is like a sheep buying a ticket to the butcher's convention. You're just giving them a fresh opportunity to make you feel like dirt. Why would you put yourself through that? More importantly, why would you put Ethan through that?" He was right. Every word was a bullseye. I remembered the last family dinner I'd attended, a Thanksgiving. I'd mentioned that I was thinking about taking an online course to get a security certification. My father had laughed, a short, barking sound. "A certification? For what?" To be a better night watchman? For God's sake, Mark, when are you going to get a real career? Vincent had just smirked into his wine glass. The memory still made my stomach clench. But the guilt machine of my family was well-oiled and ruthlessly efficient. That evening, the phone rang. It was my Aunt Carol, my father's sister, the family's velvet-gloved enforcer. "Mark, darling, it's your Auntie Carol," she chirped, her voice a sickly sweet melody. "I was just on the phone with your mother, and we were talking about how wonderful it will be to have the whole family together for Vincent's big day. You and that precious little Ethan will be there, won't you?" "I'm not sure, Aunt Carol. It's a bit of a stretch with my work schedule. A flimsy shield against a master manipulator." "Oh, don't be silly," she chided gently. "We're family. You have to be there. It would break your mother's heart if you weren't. And Vincent, he's asked about you, you know. He really wants to build bridges. This is the perfect chance for everyone to move forward. Don't let a little bit of old history get in the way of that. It would be so selfish." Selfish. Pride. The words were expertly chosen daggers, designed to make me the unreasonable one, the source of the problem. She dangled the fantasy of reconciliation, the idea that they wanted me there, that they cared. And a pathetic, hopeful part of me, the part that had never stopped wanting their approval, nibbled at the bait. That night I couldn't sleep. I stood in the doorway of Ethan's room, watching the soft rise and fall of his chest in the dim glow of his dinosaur nightlight. He was so innocent, so pure. My job was to protect that. Dave's words echoed in my head. Why put Ethan through that? But then another thought crept in, a rebellious one. What if not going was the worst choice? What if it was teaching him to hide? To be ashamed of who we were? My father and brother had spent years making me feel small. Maybe the bravest thing I could do wasn't to avoid the fight, but to walk into it and show my son that we had nothing to be ashamed of. That our life, the one we had built together, was just as valid as theirs. I walked back into the living room, picked up the fancy invitation, and held it in my hand. Felt less like a judgment now and more like a challenge. "We're going, buddy," I whispered to the sleeping form in the other room. "We're going to walk in there with our heads held high." It was a noble thought, a father's desperate attempt to turn a humiliation into a lesson. I had no idea that the lesson would be far harsher, and taught by a completely unexpected teacher. The morning of the wedding was a flurry of nervous energy. I'd spent money I didn't really have on a new, dark gray suit for me and a miniature version for Ethan. He was buzzing with excitement, a tiny gentleman adjusting his clip-on tie in the smudged hallway mirror. "Daddy, do I look handsome?" he asked, striking a serious pose. I felt a surge of love so powerful it almost knocked me off my feet. "You look like a movie star, buddy," I said, kneeling to smooth his hair. The most handsome guy in the whole place. The drive to the country club was filled with his chatter. He asked a million questions. Will there be cake? Do they get presents? Why do people get married? I answered them as best I could, my own stomach churning with a mix of dread and a stubborn flicker of hope. Maybe Aunt Carol was right. Maybe this time would be different. The hope died the moment we stepped into the lavish reception hall. The hostess, a young woman with a professionally pleasant smile, ran her manicured finger down a long, alphabetized list. "Mark, Mark," she murmured, her finger traveling further and further down the page. Finally, it stopped at the very bottom. "Ah, yes," she said, her smile tightening just a fraction. "Mark and Ethan, you're at table 9. She pointed with a pen. My eyes followed the direction, past the happy, chattering groups at tables adorned with elaborate floral centerpieces, past the gleaming dance floor, all the way to a desolate corner of the room. Table 9 was a small, lonely circle pushed up against a beige wall, right beside the swinging double doors of the kitchen and the echoing corridor to the restrooms. It was the social equivalent of Siberia. The message was brutally clear. You are here because we are obligated to invite you, but you are not one of us. Great, I said, forcing a smile for Ethan's sake. Lead the way, Captain. He giggled, oblivious, and skipped ahead. As we sat down, the sounds of the kitchen, clattering dishes, muffled shouts, became our soundtrack. From our vantage point, we could see the head table in all its glory. My father, Richard, was already holding a glass of amber liquid, laughing boisterously. Vincent was schmoozing with guests, a king in his court. My mother, Eleanor, caught my eye for a brief second. She gave me a small, pained, almost apologetic smile before quickly turning away to talk to the person next to her. It was her signature move, a fleeting acknowledgement of the injustice, followed by a swift retreat into inaction. The ceremony itself was an out-of-body experience. I sat in the back row, Ethan squirming beside me, and listened to the minister talk about love, honor, and cherish. I heard my brother, his voice thick with emotion, promise to protect and support his new wife. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. During the cocktail hour that preceded the main reception, I made a conscious effort. I took Ethan by the hand and we walked through the crowd, a father and son navigating a minefield of socialites. I tried to make conversation with a few cousins. The interactions were brief and stilted. They'd ask about my job. I'd say, "It's going well." They'd nod, and their eyes would already be scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. Then came the first unexpected moment of the evening. I saw Elise, the bride, making her way through the crowd. I expected her to move past us, but she changed course and walked directly to our forgotten corner. "You must be Mark," she said. Her smile wasn't the plastic one I'd been seeing all day. It was genuine, reaching her eyes, which were a startlingly warm shade of hazel. "That's me," I said, surprised. She then crouched down, bringing herself to Ethan's level, a graceful movement in her huge white dress. "And you have to be Ethan. Vincent's told me you're a big Lego fan." Ethan's eyes went wide. He nodded shyly. "I have the big Millennium Falcon," he whispered. "No way," she said, her enthusiasm seeming completely unforced. "That's the coolest one. It was a real pleasure to meet you, Ethan." She stood up and looked at me. "I'm so glad you both could be here today." As she spoke, her eyes flickered over my shoulder for a split second, towards the main group where my father and brother were standing. I saw her smile dim, just for a moment, as she registered their dismissive posture, their complete lack of acknowledgement of our presence. It was a micro-expression, gone in an instant, but it was there, a shadow of understanding, a hint that she was seeing the whole picture, not just the glossy, airbrushed version. Then someone called her name, and with another kind smile, she was gone, swallowed back into the celebration. The second, more sinister moment came about 20 minutes later. I was getting Ethan a ginger ale from the bar when I passed a small, curtained-off alcove. I heard Vincent's voice, loud and boastful. "Can't believe he had the nerve to actually show his face," a groomsman slurred. I heard Vincent laugh, a sound devoid of any real humor. "Are you kidding?" I was praying he would. "It makes my speech so much better." "What do you mean?" "Dude, you gotta see this," Vincent said, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial tone that sent a chill down my spine. "I've got a whole bit about him. The noble single dad. The tragic hero. It's comedy gold. I'm gonna absolutely roast him. It's time someone put him in his place in front of everyone. Let them see him for the pathetic failure he really is." I froze, hidden by the heavy velvet curtain. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't just a casual, drunken insult in the making. This was a planned, public execution. He had written it, practiced it, and was now anticipating it with glee. The malice was so pure, so potent, it almost took my breath away. He wasn't just trying to get a laugh. He wanted to destroy me. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. I felt a wave of nausea. I should have listened to Dave. I should have stayed home. I walked back to my son at table 9, my legs feeling like lead. Just then, a high-pitched clinking of a glass quieted the room. The cheerful MC stepped up to the stage. "All right, folks, let's get these speeches started. And who better to kick us off than the groom himself, Vincent?" The room erupted in applause. Vincent swaggered to the stage, took the microphone, and scanned the crowd until his eyes found mine. He gave me a slow, triumphant smile. It was the smile of a predator that has its prey exactly where it wants it. I instinctively put my arm around my son's small shoulders. The storm was no longer coming. It was here. The applause died down, replaced by a rustle of anticipation. Vincent stood in the spotlight, soaking it in. He looked like he was born for this. He started with the easy stuff, the predictable script. "Wow," he said, his voice a smooth baritone that filled the hall. "Just wow. Elise, my beautiful wife." He paused to gaze adoringly at her. From my vantage point, I could see her smile back, a perfect bridal smile, but there was a stillness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. It was the stillness of a deep lake just before a storm hits. I was probably the only one who noticed. He thanked her parents for raising such a wonderful woman. He thanked his own parents, Richard and Eleanor, for their unwavering support and for teaching him the value of ambition. My father beamed, puffing out his chest. My mother looked on with tears welling in her eyes, tears of pride. It was a perfect family portrait, and I was the ghost in the background, the inconvenient truth they had all agreed to ignore. I tried to build a wall inside my head. I told myself his words were meaningless. They were the ramblings of a shallow, insecure man. But the truth is, when you've been conditioned your whole life to crave approval from someone, their disapproval still has power, even when you know they're wrong. The words can still find the old wounds. To have all of you here, all our friends, all our family, sharing in the happiest day of my life, it means the world to us, he said, his voice thick with practiced emotion. And then came the pivot. I felt it before I heard it. A subtle shift in his posture, a slight turn of his head as his eyes scanned the back of the room and locked onto me. The spotlight wasn't on me, but it felt like it was. "And you know," he said, his voice changing, taking on the confidential, conspiratorial tone of a comedian setting up a bit. "Speaking of family, I can't not mention my big brother, Mark." The name dropped into the silent room like a stone in a pond. The ripples of attention spread outwards, all heading for me. "My brother. He's a character," Vincent began, a small, cruel smile playing on his lips. "He's always marched to the beat of his own drum. A very, very different drum. A drum that sounds a lot like, I don't know, the beep of a cash register at a hardware store, and the squeak of lonely security guard shoes on a linoleum floor." A few uncomfortable chuckles broke the silence. He was testing the waters. I could feel people shifting in their seats, their curiosity piqued. I stared down at the tablecloth, at the intricate pattern of the weave, focusing on it, trying to ground myself. "He's a single father," Vincent announced, his voice booming with false admiration. "He's raising a child all by himself. No wife, no partner, a complete and utter failure in the relationship department. But hey, you gotta give the guy points for trying, right?" The laughter was louder now. It was a release of tension for the crowd. The joke had been sanctioned. It was okay to laugh at me. I could feel the heat crawling up my neck, a blush of pure, helpless rage and humiliation. I wanted to be anywhere else on earth. "But seriously, folks," Vincent leaned into the microphone, his voice dropping as if sharing a secret. "It's truly inspiring how he manages to survive. It's a tough world out there, especially when you have no real career, no assets, no future to speak of. 2 dead-end jobs just to scrape by. I mean, what a trooper." He paused, letting the pity and condescension hang in the air. "A single dad, complete failure, but he still shows up. Let's give him a round of applause. Everybody. The man is a survivor." He began to clap, a slow, mocking rhythm. A smattering of applause broke out across the room, hesitant at first, then growing as people felt the social pressure to join in. It was the most humiliating sound I had ever heard. It was an ovation for my own inadequacy. I just sat there, paralyzed, my hands balled into fists in my lap. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, my own father delivered the finishing blow. Richard, from his throne at the head table, got to his feet and raised his champagne flute high. "He's damaged goods," he roared, his face flushed with victory. "But he still polishes up well. Doesn't he? That's when the dam broke. The room exploded in laughter. It wasn't a chuckle or a titter. It was a full-throated, braying roar. They were laughing at the joke, at the spectacle, at my expense. I was the court jester, and I hadn't even known I was supposed to be performing. But the sound of their laughter, as loud and painful as it was nothing compared to the tiny, trembling voice beside me. "Daddy!" I forced myself to look down at Ethan. His face was ashen. His big, innocent eyes were filled with a universe of confusion and hurt. He wasn't looking at the stage anymore. He was looking at me, searching my face for an answer, for reassurance, for anything that would make sense of this sudden, inexplicable cruelty. "Daddy, why are they laughing at you?" He whispered again, and this time, a tear escaped and traced a path down his cheek. That tear shattered me. It broke through the wall I had tried to build. The shame I felt in that moment was suffocating. It wasn't shame for being a single dad, or for my jobs. It was shame for bringing my beautiful, innocent son into this den of vipers. Shame that he had to see his father be torn down by the people who were supposed to love him most. That was it. I was done being their punching bag. I put my hand on Ethan's shoulder, my decision made. We were leaving. But before I could even push my chair back, another chair moved. A figure in white rose. Elise. The wave of laughter was just beginning to crest when Elise stood up. The movement was so sudden, so imbued with a quiet, steely resolve, that it acted as a visual full stop. She didn't storm off. She didn't burst into tears. She simply rose to her full height, a column of white defiance in a room swirling with ugliness. Vincent's smug monologue stuttered to a halt. The smile froze on his face. "Elise? Honey? What are you doing?" he asked, a note of confusion creeping into his voice. She ignored him completely. Her focus was singular. She walked the few paces to the stage, her long train gliding silently behind her. Her movements were not rushed. They were deliberate, each step landing with an undeniable finality. Vincent, looking utterly bewildered, opened his mouth to protest, but she was already there. She reached out a steady hand and took the microphone from his. His fingers, which had been gripping it like a scepter of power, went limp. He let it go without a fight, too stunned to do otherwise. And then the silence fell. It was not a polite pause. It was a thick, heavy blanket of astonishment that smothered every other sound in the room. The last dregs of laughter died in people's throats. 100 conversations, 100 whispers, all ceased at once. Every eye was locked on the bride. She turned to face the crowd, holding the microphone loosely at her side. She took a deep, centering breath, and her gaze swept across the sea of stunned faces. She didn't look angry. She looked clear, as if a fog had lifted and she was seeing everything and everyone for exactly what they were. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was calm, measured, but it sliced through the silence with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "My name is Elise, and as of a few minutes ago, I was supposed to be the bride at this wedding." A collective gasp went through the room. The past tense was supposed to be hung in the air, electric and ominous. "I find myself in a difficult position," she continued, her voice unwavering, "because I was raised to be polite, to not make a scene, to smile and endure. But I will not stand here tonight and participate in this. I will not lend my silence, my smile, or my presence to this cruelty." She finally turned her head and looked directly at me, across the wide expanse of the hall. Her eyes locked with mine, and in that gaze, I felt a lifetime of shame begin to lift. It was a look of profound, unconditional respect. "I have been listening and watching all evening," she said, her voice softening with a note of genuine warmth. "And I look at Mark and I do not see a failure. I see a man who works 2 jobs, not because he lacks ambition, but because he is dedicated to providing for his son. I see a father who, despite being exhausted, showed up here today to celebrate his brother, to honor the idea of family, even when that family has shown him so little honor in return." She then turned her gaze to the head table, and the warmth in her voice instantly froze over, becoming sharp and cold as ice. And then I look at my new family, she said, the words falling like chips of stone. And I see a man, she glanced at the pale, sweating Vincent, who is so insecure in his own skin that he has to publicly humiliate his own brother to feel powerful. And I see another man. Her eyes drilled into my father, who was now a statue of purple-faced fury, who is so devoid of compassion that he calls his own son damaged goods as a wedding toast. My father, Richard, finally found his voice. "Now you just wait a minute, young lady," he roared, half rising from his chair, his finger jabbing in her direction. "You have no right." "No." Elise cut him off, her voice ringing with an authority that silenced him instantly. "You have had your turn to speak. Now I will have mine. For weeks I have listened to you all talk about family, about tradition, about loyalty. But what kind of tradition is this? A tradition of belittling others to elevate yourselves? What kind of loyalty is this? A loyalty that demands silence in the face of injustice." She took a step forward, her presence commanding the entire room. "I came here today believing I was marrying a man, partner, someone to build a life with, based on mutual respect, kindness, and integrity. But I realize now I was mistaken. That man is not on this stage." She paused, letting the devastating sentence land. "The man I see is Mark. He is the one who embodies those values. He is the one who is rich in the ways that actually matter." She turned to Vincent, her expression not one of anger, but of a deep, sorrowful pity. "I will not be the woman who stands by your side and enables this. I will not raise children in a family where cruelty is the currency of affection. I will not marry a man who is so profoundly empty. That isn't a man. That is a coward." The shock in the room was a living entity. It was in the dropped jaws, the wide eyes, the absolute, unbroken stillness. This was not just a cancelled wedding. This was a public dissection of a family's soul, laid bare for all to see. With a final, graceful movement, Elise placed the microphone gently on the stage floor. The soft thud echoed like a gunshot in the silent hall. She turned her back on Vincent, on my father, on the entire spectacle. She walked down the steps, and as she passed the center aisle, her eyes met mine one last time. She gave me a small, deliberate nod. It was a gesture of solidarity, a silent acknowledgement that said, "I see you. You are worthy." And then, she turned and walked, with her head held high, straight down the aisle and out the double doors, leaving behind the wreckage of a wedding and a silence filled with the truth she had so bravely unleashed. The moment the great oak doors swung shut behind Elise, the spell was broken. A collective, shuddering gasp seemed to pass through the room. My mother let out a strangled sob. Vincent, on the stage, looked like he had been turned to stone, his face a ghastly shade of white. My father, Richard, finally sank back into his chair, his face a thunderous mask of pure, impotent fury. The air was thick with the fallout of the explosion. This was my chance. The focus of the entire room was on the smoldering crater at the head table. No one was looking at the forgotten corner. "Come on, buddy," I whispered to Ethan, my voice surprisingly steady. "Let's go home." I took his small, warm hand in mine. He didn't protest. He just looked up at me, his eyes wide with a million questions he didn't know how to ask, and squeezed my hand back. We got up from table 9 and began our quiet escape. We hugged the back wall, slipping past the now-abandoned bar, our footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. I could feel the stares on my back, but they were different now. They weren't filled with mockery. They were filled with a stunned, bewildered curiosity. We were no longer the joke. We were part of the main event, the collateral witnesses to a spectacular act of defiance. The cool night air of the parking lot felt like a splash of cold water to the face. It smelled of cut grass and freedom. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the first one that didn't feel constricted by shame. The wedding was over. It was really over. "Daddy, is that lady going to be in trouble?" Ethan asked, his voice small and worried. "No, buddy," I said, kneeling down in front of him. "She's not in trouble. She was being brave." just as I was trying to figure out how to explain the concept of moral courage to an 8-year-old. The doors of the hall burst open again. A man hurried out, his tie askew. It was my Uncle Robert, my mother's brother-in-law, a man I'd always known as quiet and perpetually browbeaten by my father. "Mark, wait!" he called out, his voice hoarse. I instinctively tensed, preparing for another wave of family drama. An accusation, a demand. But as he got closer, I could see his face was pale and slick with sweat. His eyes were filled not with anger, but with a profound, gut-wrenching shame. "Mark, I'm so sorry," he stammered, wringing his hands. "What Richard and Vincent did. It was disgusting. I've been sitting there at family dinners for 20 years, listening to them talk down to you, and I never said a word. Not one word." His voice cracked. "I'm a coward." He fumbled in his jacket pocket, pulling out his phone. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped it. "I recorded it, Mark. Her speech. I don't even know why. I just felt like the truth needed a witness. Like it needed to be saved." He held the phone out to me, a desperate offering. "Here, you should have this. Do whatever you want with it. Maybe nothing, but it's yours. I'm so sorry I didn't have the guts to do what she did." I looked from his anguished face to the phone in his hand. This small, timid man had, in his own way, performed an act of rebellion. It was a quiet rebellion born of guilt, but it was a rebellion nonetheless. I took the phone. "Thank you, Robert," I said, my voice quiet. "Thank you." He just gave a jerky nod, unable to meet my eyes, and then he turned and scurried back into the chaos of the hall, a man running back to his comfortable cage. The drive home was surreal. Ethan, exhausted by the emotional roller coaster, fell asleep in the back seat within minutes, his quiet breathing the only sound in the car. The streetlights of the city blurred into long streaks of gold and white. My mind was a kaleidoscope of replaying images. Vincent's smug face, my father's roar of laughter, Elisa's steady eyes, her final respectful nod. A stranger had seen me, truly seen me, and had detonated her own life to defend my honor. It was a debt I could never repay. The next morning, the conversation I'd been dreading with Ethan happened over pancakes. I explained it as gently as I could, that sometimes people who feel small try to make others feel smaller, and that true strength is being kind when it would be easier to be cruel. "That lady in the white dress," he'd concluded with the simple wisdom of a child. "She's the strongest." Just then, my phone buzzed. The caller ID read, "Dad." A familiar knot of ice formed in my stomach. For a moment, I considered not answering, but I knew he would just keep calling. I took a breath and tapped the screen. "I hope you're happy," he roared. No greeting, no preamble. "You and that crazy woman. You have humiliated this family in front of everyone who matters. Do you have any idea the damage you've caused?" I listened to the tirade, the same old song of blame and projection. But for the first time, the words didn't have the same venomous power. They were the desperate shouts of a king whose castle had just crumbled around him. He wasn't angry at me for what I did. He was angry at me for being the catalyst for his own public exposure. I looked over at Ethan, who was watching me with worried eyes. I saw his face, and I knew with absolute clarity what I had to do. The cycle of abuse, of accepting the blame, of shrinking myself to make them feel big, it ended here. It ended now. I held the phone to my ear, took a slow, deliberate breath, and spoke. My voice was quiet, but it was my own. "Dad," I said calmly, "I am not going to have this conversation with you. I will not allow my son to listen to you speak to me this way." There was a moment of pure, apoplectic silence on the other end. I could practically hear him processing this unprecedented act of defiance. What did you just say to me?" he finally sputtered, his voice choked with rage. "Goodbye, Dad," and I pressed the red button on the screen. The click of the call ending was a small, insignificant sound. But to me, it was the sound of a prison door swinging open. It was the sound of freedom. The 6 months following the wedding that were a lesson in the physics of fallout. The initial explosion was over, but the radioactive dust was still settling. I never released the video Uncle Robert had given me. It felt like a weapon I didn't need to use. The truth, it turned out, had its own powerful momentum. The story of Elisa's speech and her dramatic exit became a piece of local legend, whispered about at grocery stores and PTA meetings. My family name, once a symbol of success in our small community, was now attached to a story of public disgrace. As for the family itself, it fractured. Vincent, I heard through the grapevine, had a brief, spectacular meltdown and then threw himself into his work, a man trying to outrun his own humiliation. My mother left me a series of rambling, tear-filled voicemails, a tangled mess of apology and blame that I couldn't bring myself to return. And from my father, there was only a vast, cold silence. The lines of communication had been severed. The silence was a relief. It was like the cessation of a chronic, low-grade pain I hadn't realized I was living with until it was gone. The most profound change, however, was internal. The heavy cloak of shame I'd worn for years, the one that made me walk with my shoulders hunched and my eyes down, started to feel lighter. I had been publicly tested in the most brutal way imaginable, and I had endured. More than that, someone else had seen my value so clearly that she had been willing to sacrifice her own wedding for it. Elisa's act of courage recalibrated my own sense of self-worth. I started to see myself not as the failure my family had always painted me as, but as the father my son looked up to. This newfound perspective was a catalyst. For years, I had been treading water, caught in the exhausting riptide of just getting by. The 2 jobs, the constant fatigue, the endless cycle of bills. It wasn't a life, it was a holding pattern. I deserved more. Ethan deserved more. He deserved a father who wasn't a ghost in the evenings, a father who had time and energy for him. So I declared war on my own inertia. I enrolled in an online course for an advanced security management certification. Late at night, after my shift at the silent office building, I would sit at my small kitchen table, the apartment quiet except for Ethan's soft breathing from his room, and I would study. With a yellow highlighter and a pot of strong coffee, I forced new information into my tired brain. I updated my resume, the act of listing my skills and experience feeling less like a chore and more like an act of defiance. I was taking back the narrative of my own life. I began applying for jobs, real jobs, salaried positions with daytime hours and benefits, supervisor roles. I sent out dozens of applications. The rejections came, of course, and each one stung. But they didn't crush me the way they would have a year ago. They were just data. They were just proof that I needed to try again. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm, deep, and professional. Am I speaking with Mark? Yes, this is he. My name is Frank Peterson. I own Peterson Security Solutions. I'm looking at your application for our site supervisor position. I was hoping you might have some time to come in for an interview. My heart did a backflip. Peterson Security was the gold standard in our city. They were a serious, professional outfit. Yes, absolutely, I managed, trying to sound calm and collected. The interview was a few days later. Mr. Peterson's office was neat and unassuming. He was a man in his 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes and the ramrod straight posture of a man who had spent time in the military. He didn't waste time with small talk. He had my resume on the desk in front of him. You've held down 2 jobs for almost a decade while raising a son on your own, he said, his gaze direct. That tells me you're reliable and you have a strong work ethic. That's a good start. Thank you, sir. I do my best. He leaned back in his high-backed leather chair and steepled his fingers. I'm going to be straight with you, Mark. Your resume got you in the door. But it's not the only reason you're here. He paused, his eyes searching my face. My cousin's wife is a florist. She worked a wedding at the Northwood Country Club about 6 months ago. A wedding for a young man named Vincent. The blood drained from my face. I felt like I was back at table 9. She told me what happened, Mr. Peterson said, his voice even. She told me about the groom's brother, a single father who was being torn apart by his own family. And she told me about the bride who stood up and spoke the truth. I sat there, speechless, my past once again confronting me. In this business, he continued, leaning forward. Character is everything. I was in the Marines for 20 years. I learned that you don't judge a man by how he acts when things are easy. You judge him by how he holds himself under fire. From what I heard, you took a direct hit in front of 100 people, and you didn't lash out, you didn't crumble. You just took care of your son and walked away with your dignity. That's a kind of strength I can't teach. That's the kind of man I want supervising my teams. He extended a hand across the desk. The job is yours if you want it, Mark. I shook his hand, my own hand trembling slightly. This wasn't a handout. This wasn't pity. This was respect. It was an opportunity one had earned, not just with my work, but with my character. A week later, sitting in my living room after accepting the new position, an email landed in my inbox. The sender was simply Elise. Mark, I hope this email finds you well. I found your address through a mutual acquaintance and wanted to reach out. I have often thought about you and Ethan and hoped that the aftermath of the wedding was not too difficult for you. I wanted to apologize for any chaos my actions may have caused. But more than that, I wanted to thank you. For a long time, I had been ignoring the red flags with Vincent and his family, telling myself I was overreacting. But seeing the quiet dignity with which you carried yourself, and the unconditional love in your son's eyes, it was like a bucket of cold water. It reminded me of what true strength and true family look like. You gave me the clarity I needed to make the hardest and best decision of my life. I've moved to a new city and I'm starting over. It's scary, but it's good. I hope life is bringing you good things as well. You and your son deserve all of them. Sincerely, Elise. I closed my laptop and felt a final, profound sense of peace. Our stories were linked, not by romance, but by a shared moment of liberation. We were two people who had broken free from toxic cages. Her cage was just a bit more gilded than mine. It's been a year since the wedding that changed my life. It's a bright Saturday morning, and the sunlight is streaming into the kitchen of my new apartment. It's not much bigger than the old one, but it's ours, and it's in a neighborhood with more trees and less traffic. The air smells not of faint despair, but of the bacon and eggs I'm cooking for my son. My weekends are my own now. My evenings are my own. My life is my own. Ethan, now a lanky, confident 9-year-old, is chattering away about his little league game this afternoon. A year ago, I would have had to drop him off and race to my second job. Today, I'm the assistant coach. I'll be there in the dugout, cheering him on. The ghosts of my past have faded. I no longer walk through the world braced for the next insult, the next judgment. That constant, low-level hum of anxiety that was the soundtrack to my life has finally gone quiet. I learned a hard lesson that night at the wedding. I had spent my entire adult life chasing the approval of people who were fundamentally incapable of giving it. I had been measuring my own worth using their broken ruler. My worth wasn't in a job title or a bank account. It was forged in the quiet moments. In the 4:30 a.m. alarms I never snoozed, in the thousands of bedtime stories I'd read, in the simple, unshakable love I had for the little boy who called me Dad. No amount of mockery could ever diminish that. It took the courage of a stranger to help me see the value in myself, a value that had been there all along. Later that day, the sun is warm on our shoulders as we stand on the baseball field. Ethan has just smacked a line drive into center field and is standing proudly on second base, a triumphant grin on his face. I'm leaning against the chain-link fence of the dugout when I feel a friendly clap on my back. It's my boss, Mr. Peterson. His grandson plays on the opposing team. He nods towards Ethan. Kid's got a future. He's a hard worker. He gets it from his old man, I say with a small, confident smile. Mr. Peterson grins. That's what I like to hear. You're doing a great job, Mark. Here and at work. We're lucky to have you. He gives my shoulder a firm, respectful squeeze before heading towards the concession stand. I stand there watching my son. I watch the other parents in the stands, cheering for their kids. I feel the warmth of the sun, the solid ground beneath my feet. A simple compliment, a respectful boss. Proud son. This was it. This was family. This was success. It wasn't the loud, brittle, ostentatious version my father and brother chased. It was quiet. It was steady. It was real. and it was mine. I wasn't damaged goods. I was a man who had finally come home to himself. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where a stranger's kindness changed everything? Or where you had to stand up to your own family to protect your peace? I'd love to hear about it. Please share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.